To the United States now, where the January 6th committee investigating the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol says they need to hear from one more witness.
We have left no doubt, none, that Donald Trump led an effort to upend American democracy that directly resulted in the violence of January 6th. He tried to take away the voice of the American people in choosing their president and replace the will of the voters with his will to remain in power. He is the one person at the center of the story of what happened on January 6th. So we want to hear from him.
And so the committee put the resolution to subpoena former President Donald Trump to testify to a vote.
Those in favor will say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed is no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
For more on this and the fallout from it, I'm joined by former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Bruce Heyman. Ambassador Heyman, good to have you with us as always.
Good to be back with you, Vashi.
Let's start at the end of the hearing and what we just played for our viewers. The fact that the committee has voted to subpoena former President Donald Trump. How significant is that from your perspective?
I think it's significant and it's appropriate given the findings that the January 6th committee has had throughout this process. So Canadians know this, and they know my view as well. Donald John Trump is the greatest threat that the U.S. has had to its democracy, and it continues today. And unless we address that very directly and head on, that threat will continue, and our democracy is fragile. We all know how fragile democracies are, and we need to continue to address the insurrection, but also the cult-like figure of Donald Trump.
Do you think this was the plan of the committee all along, or do you think it's somewhat in response to concern that there may not be any criminal charges pursued against him?
I think this is a result of 1,000 interviews. I think this is a result of testimony, and testimony that has evolved over the entire hearing, in which they had insiders within the White House, senior government officials in the Trump administration, throughout the Trump administration, that told the committee very directly that the president knew he lost this election, and yet he had a plan to continue to deny that he had lost and also foment this violence that took place on January 6th. So I think this is just a natural extension of everything that has taken place in the committee so far, and we'll see how this unfolds to the end of this committee, which is likely to end in this congressional term.
I think everyone's follow-up is, will he actually appear? And to that end, I'll read you his response, which came out, I think, on his social media channels, and then you can help us offer some context around it. He says, the former president says, "Why didn't the unselect committee ask me to testify months ago? Why did they wait until the very end, the final moments of their last meeting? Because the committee is a total bust that has only served to further divide our country, which, by the way, is doing very badly. A laughing stock all over the world, capitalized with a question mark." Your response and context you'd offer around that.
Donald Trump is a person that knows how to, unfortunately, effectively evade law enforcement and evade subpoenas and all these inquiries. And he will do his very best, as he's doing in the documents case, as he's doing in his personal liability cases on sexual inappropriateness, on his cases against his company on tax evasion. He will delay, and he will use every technique possible to delay, and try to run out the clock, as they say in the sports world. But I think the walls are closing in on him on a number of these cases.
In that vein, I do want to ask you about the overall impact of these hearings and your sense of to what degree they've resonated with the American public. And right before I do that, I just want to share with you and our audience who may not have followed all the hearings this afternoon, a really compelling piece of tape from this afternoon's hearing that involves the Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It's a little bit long, so bear with us. It's about a minute long. Let's play that for our audience and for the ambassador.
Oh my gosh, they're just breaking windows, they're doing all kinds of, it's really that they said somebody was shot. It was just horrendous, and all at the instigation of the President of the United States. Okay, thank you, Governor. I appreciate what you're doing, and If you don't mind, I'd like to stay in touch. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Virginia Guard has been called in.
You know, I'm just talking to Governor Northam, and what he said is they sent 200 state police and a unit of the National Guard. They're breaking windows and going in, obviously ransacking our offices and all the rest of that. That's nothing. The concern we have about personal harm, personal safety is it just transcends everything. But the fact is, on any given day, they're breaking the law in many different ways. And quite frankly, much of it at the instigation of the President of the United States. And now, if he could at least somebody.
Yeah, why don't you get the President to tell them to leave the Capitol, Mr. Attorney General, in your law enforcement responsibility? A public statement, they should all leave.
So, Ambassador, that's Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer speaking to the Attorney General at the time, essentially asking him to ask the president to get people to leave. That's happening as all of this is unfolding. Your reaction to that video and your sense of how that, compounded with other evidence presented, has resonated with Americans?
So first of all, I got chills listening to it. And, you know, we've all known what happened and we watched it many times over. But even as you listen to that, you realize how threatened our legislators were. And the risk to democracy was, you know, just a steps away from confirming the election results that happened in 2020. So I think that if you think about pockets of people in America, you have Democrats and you have Republicans. And you have, in the Republican side, you have hardcore Trump followers, regardless of what he does or says, they will follow him. And then you have those other, I think, respectable Republicans that are just not comfortable with Donald Trump. You also have independents. The goal, I think, of this committee is to illuminate for all Americans, but especially for those Republicans and independents who are trying to make decisions about elections, midterms coming up, a presidential election in just a couple of years, that Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy and to our country. And it was very close. And hopefully that Americans will take that in, digest it, and vote, and ensure that the followers, disciples of Donald Trump, are not elected into office. And with this note, I must say, the largest number of Americans living outside the United States is in Canada. There is an estimated 600,000 eligible voters in Canada that can vote in the U.S. election. Go to votefromabroad.org, register to vote, and vote. You can have a say in this. And why do I know that? Because in 2020, Georgia was won and Arizona was won by the margin of the American voter abroad. And so the American voter outside the United States has a hand in this. And I think in part that's what the committee was communicating to Americans everywhere, how close we were and what we need to do to deal with this.
Ambassador, I'll leave it there. Thanks as always for your time today.
Pleasure. Be well.
Bruce Heyman, former U.S. Ambassador to Canada.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.